America's fate, both in terms of how our system works here at home, our prosperity, our resources, ultimately hinges on choices that we make as Americans.
You're watching Faith Complex, a dialogue about the intersection of religion, politics, and art.
Hi, my name is Mitchel Hochberg, and you are watching Faith Complex. I'm joined today by Dr. Robert Lieber, who is a professor of government and international affairs here at Georgetown University and the author of the recently released Power and Willpower in the American Future. Professor Lieber, thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be with you.
A lot of scholars think that American power is on the decline, but in your book you argue precisely the opposite. What are they missing?
They're all subject to short-term thinking. They're responding to the problems we've had in Iraq and Afghanistan some years ago, the Great Recession, and they're missing the point. The point is that the material situation in the United States is actually quite good. The real issues are in terms of ideas, policy, resolve, choices. Decline is not baked in the cake. It's not a fate, it's a choice.
Professor Lieber, budget deficits and long-term debts have crippled world powers in the past. Why won't they cripple the U.S.?
We have the capacity to do this, to fix it, and ironically, the worse the problem is in terms of long-term debt and deficit, the more likely that political figures, the Congress and the President, will finally get the job done. It's not a certainty, but it's accessible and entirely feasible. America's fate, both in terms of how our system works here at home, our prosperity, our resources, ultimately hinges on choices that we make as Americans. It's a neat example of what I said about short-term thinking and the inability to step back and take the broader view. In recent years, there's been a remarkable renaissance in American energy, particularly first in natural gas and now in oil. We will still be dependent on imports to some extent, but our vulnerability will be greatly reduced, and the impact on the economy is going to be enormously positive over the coming 5 to 10 years.
America's current political system has been described as dysfunctional, toxic, and broken. In your book, you make a few excellent suggestions for reforms to the immigration and entitlement programs, which you say would sustain U.S. power. How could those reforms be enacted in this polarized political climate?
The political climate is polarized, there's no doubt about it. But American politics is a contact sport and always has been. I think the sense that we have a long-term problem on our hands, that we've come through a very severe financial and economic crisis, tends to focus the mind. And after the election, I think there's a better chance that political leaders will finally grapple and finally make the choices they need to make.
Now, China could pose a threat to U.S. superpowerdom. Are you worried about their rise?
Not yet. I think there's a gross overestimation of China. China has had an extraordinary, really historically unprecedented rise. The problem is that as China becomes more developed, the things that have served it well so far will not work. The model of enormous increases, double-digit in export-led growth every year, are not sustainable. The customers won't buy it, and China has large domestic needs. State capitalism is not competitive over the long term. Short term, it can do remarkable things. Fast trains, shiny airports, highways, and so forth. But longer term, the innovations of the sort that you see with Apple or Google or Intel are things that rarely can be inspired by what government does. An example is in the energy realm that I just referred to. The advances in oil and gas drilling that have made these resources usable and available to us came about primarily because of private sector, entrepreneurial, and company actions. Government's not irrelevant, but it's a mistake to see government as the driving force behind all this. It's simply not. It's hard for governments to pick winners in any country, and that's a disadvantage for China, as well as its disadvantage about corruption, Communist Party dictatorship, the environment, popular resentments, and so forth. Those things are going to give China much greater problems in the years to come.
Now, if China does fix some of these structural problems and figures out a way to rise, the U.S. will no longer be an unmatched power. Why is it important for the U.S. to be this powerful?
For the United States, maintaining the power position it has is important, not just in terms of its own national interest and security, but because if America really withdraws, if it becomes an offshore balancer, if it pulls back, the world is likely to become more disorderly. Regional conflict is much likely to be greater. Things we care about, including a more prosperous world, human rights, democracy, international institutions, are likely to become more damaged, less viable, without the U.S. playing an active, engaged role.
There's a law of international relations gravity that states that all superpowers must eventually fall. If not now, when?
America's fate, both in terms of how our system works here at home, our prosperity, our resources, ultimately hinges on choices that we make as Americans, as people, and through our governing institutions. As far as you can look forward, that is a generation, there's no reason to see that America will necessarily be overtaken by another actor, in this case, China. Decline is a matter of choice. If we fail to do the things that are available to us, but we have the capacity to handle our problems and maintain an important and leading international role.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Professor Lieber.
It's been my pleasure.